Well, hello and welcome to this, the last in our series of the wilderness experience. So I'll begin with a prayer. God of all seasons, in your pattern of things there is a time for keeping and a time for losing, a time for building up and a time for pulling down. In this Easter season, as we have journeyed with our Lord to the cross, help us to discern in our lives what we must lay down and what we must take up, what we must end and what we must begin. And some verses from Psalm 78, beginning at verse 19, and I'm reading from the Passion translation. It's an interpretation written from the heart. Like spoiled children, they grumbled against God, demanding he prove his love by saying, "Can't God provide for us in this barren wilderness? Will he give us food, or will he only give us water? Where's our meal?" Then God heard all their complaining and was furious. His anger flared up against his people. For they turned away from faith and walked away in fear. They failed to trust in his power to help them when he was near. Still he spoke on their behalf, and the skies opened up. The windows of heaven poured out food, the mercy bread manna. The grain of grace fell from the clouds. His humans ate angels' food, the meal of the mighty ones. His grace gave them more than enough. And as we've been walking and exploring through the wilderness, maybe we have become to understand the trust in God whose grace is more than enough. And so as we come perhaps to the edge of our wilderness, we can look towards the distance. We can see the edge in the distance. And we can turn around and see the way that we've come. We can look around, we can look behind, and we can look forward. I wonder what our thoughts are as we walk through the wilderness, as we've shared in these experiences. But one thing I'm sure we know is that in the wilderness, whether it's a mental one, a spiritual one, a physical wilderness, we know we are never alone. And as I'm recording this ready for Easter Saturday, that in-between time between Good Friday and Easter Day, we know we have walked with the Lord, we have walked with Jesus on the way of the cross. And as we leave the wilderness back into our daily life, whether that's normal life as we know it or life in lockdown, we take something with us, and Jesus walks with us, and Jesus above all says, "Remember me." What I thought I'd like to do now is to share some wilderness experiences with you. Some big, some are mine, and some are other people's. But let me share some wilderness experiences with you. And the first one is about Christchurch in New Zealand. Some years ago, Laurie and I spent 3 months in New Zealand and Australia, and we flew into Christchurch. And here's a photo of one of the first places we walked to as we walked from the outskirts of the city into the centre where it had been devastated by an earthquake. So we came across this empty site with wooden arches in it, and on them were plaques saying, "Life in vacant spaces." And these wooden arches had plugs in them so that people could plug into electricity and set up pop-up events. But it was the life in vacant spaces that spoke to me. What does it mean to live in a vacant space? How many of us have no vacant spaces in which to find life? And if we do have them, do we live in them or just exist? And I wrote this and shared this before anything about COVID-19. And I guess now many of us have found something about vacant spaces, and I wonder what we have come to understand by these vacant spaces. What can we do to put life into a vacant space? If it's vacant, then it's just waiting for us to put something in. And how often we just fill the space with anything rather than filling it with life. So meditation is perhaps a vacant space in which we can find God. If God is light and life, then that is the most amazing thing to fill our vacant space with. So vacant can mean nothing, or it can mean that opportunity for exploration, an opportunity for hope and possibilities. Can you see a vacant space crying out to be filled with opportunity? In Christchurch, the city was devastated and destroyed by that earthquake in 2011, particularly the centre, the shopping centre, the cathedral square was absolutely devastated. And yet, 5 years on when we were there, walking through that cathedral square, the words that jumped out at me were hope, possibilities, creativity and thinking outside the box. If everything has gone, everything as they knew it has gone, then we can seize the vacant space and find new life. That was a picture of the shopping mall. The shopping centre was destroyed and yet has been rebuilt in containers, container city. And it was full of vibrance and life and community. And the word that came to me was resurrection, life from out of the rubble, new ways of being community. And in Cathedral Square, in front of the ruined cathedral, there was this. A whare, that's spelt W-H-A-R-E, and is the Maori word for house. It was made from scaffolding and plastic bread baskets and filled with local and exotic plants. And the words there said, a hopeful presence, an affirmation of life and existence alongside the acknowledgement of loss, all seen in its relationship to the damaged cathedral. And alongside it a mural full of vibrance and colour and shapes, reaffirming and celebrating the cathedral square as a meeting place, a place of open and inclusive welcome. It says, the mural unleashes colour, pattern and energy to create an active sense of possibility, focusing on the intersections between culture, nature, history. It says, the work invites contemplation. And there was another picture of the transitional cathedral, built in place of a ruined parish church, made out of cardboard tubes. And an architect from Japan came over and designed it for them. So, two amazing stories and pictures of life after a wilderness of the earthquake. And just another little picture from me from home of a wisteria growing over our front door. you can see it's got lots of flowers. Well, a few years ago, it only ever produced 1 or 2 flowers, lots of leaf, and we were forever cutting it down. And they came to re-tarmac the pavements, and we said, don't worry about the wisteria, it doesn't do anything, we're going to cut it down. So they dug the root up for us, covered it with tarmac, and that was fine. A few months later, coming through the tarmac, a little shoot, and it wound its way up, it grew and grew, and so now it produces more flowers than ever before. A wonderful story of that poor wisteria which we dispatched to the wilderness, coming back to new life. I'd now like to share a story with you of a lady that I met when I was on retreat. I will call her Mary. She's quite an amazing person, but she'd had a very unhappy childhood. She felt unloved and had witnessed violence. And she had no idea that I was planning a retreat called the Wilderness Experience when I was chatting to her. And she spoke about having a stroke and losing her language and being in the wilderness. She said, in the wilderness you find the spring of water, which you only find if you walk into the wilderness. As I got to know her a little, she shared some more of her story, and she's allowed me to share her story with you. She grew up and trained as a nurse and was always very busy. About 10 years ago she had cancer, and she recovered, but she knew that God wanted her to give him her writing, music and art, and let him give back what he wanted to, as she realised that she shouldn't hide them any more, as they were his gifts. Now she had no idea how to do this or what was going to happen. And then, a few years later, she had a stroke, after which she lost all her use of language. A true wilderness for her, where nothing was as she knew it, except for God. She described it as the slate being wiped clean, and felt God saying to her, let me write on it. And slowly he gave her back what was needed. All the memories are there, but she's now able to see them from more of a distance, allowing the healing to come. She says the stroke took the live bit out of the virus of pain in her so that she could heal. It's been hard work, but every step has been led by God. And she described her wilderness experience something like this: emotionally broken in childhood, physically broken during cancer, mentally broken with a stroke. God offered her healing, and when she had no language, God gave her visions. She described a vision that she had at the very beginning. It was a vision of an old red peeling door which was ajar. She said, I knew that if I walked through it I could get back to normal, but on the other side there were dark hooded figures. I said, no, I'm not going back to that, and asked Jesus to slam the door shut. She said, I would rather move forward with God than go back into what I had known. I slowly walked towards healing with God rather than have instantaneous healing. There was an enormous cost to that healing, but what she received was true healing. Her wilderness was a place that liberated her into the place that she is now, a place of healing and true joy, but at an enormous cost. She now has time to intercede, to pray with and for others, and she has a gift of healing prayer that I have experienced. The wilderness is a place of healing away the layers until we know ourselves as loved by God. God sees who we are. He made us and loves us. If we can see ourselves as God knows us, then we can know that we are not alone. In the wilderness, God not only heals, but gives a new life or a new perspective on the old. It's only then he can gain our trust. If the wilderness is a forest, in the forest there are always shafts of light, glimmers of hope lighting the way. And a quote from Mary. At the end of it, through the gateway of what I thought possible, I find another landscape more beautiful than I imagined. When God made me, what did he see? Our time in the wilderness, as we come out, we can be sent back or we move forwards. Mary went forwards. I had an experience, not quite a wilderness experience, but a sort of. My experience was one where I was sent back. I was on retreat, a silent retreat for a week, and it was absolute heaven for me. However, about day 3, I thought, I felt in the wilderness, I just want to get back to normal. But God took me on a journey. I went for a walk. There's some lovely walks that are my favourite, and I went for my walk, and I missed the track. So I ended up walking down the road in a place that I hadn't walked before. And it was a beautiful sunny day, even though it was November. It was really warm. And I came to a gate with a lovely view, and I stood by this gate and looked over the gate. And here is the gate. As I stood at this gate and prayed and just gloried in the sunshine. And I saw a track leading away into the distance. And this was quite exciting. I thought, I really want to go down that track. And there were views either side, which I thought, do I want to go this way or that way? And this was at a time when I was really thinking, what direction do I take? So I thought, I really want to go down that track. And it's on private land, but that's the way I want to go. I want something new. I want to go forward. And I tried to climb over the gate, but I couldn't. I mean, physically I could, but I just could not climb over that gate. And then I realised the only way to get back to the retreat house was to go back the way that I came. And I knew that I had to go back. But all those exciting opportunities were in my mind and not the way God was leading. So here I am, back, with some time later, discovering this new and fascinating online ministry. So in the wilderness of lockdown, I have discovered some new hope. Discovered that we can trust God, and that it's hard and it's not the way we think we want to go. I always remember some years ago when again I was asking God for direction, and I heard God say, I was asking when, and he said 18 months. And I remember saying, you know it's of God, because that's not what I wanted to hear. But he was right. So some wilderness experiences. And this reflection has come at the end of Holy Week. And as we come to the end of the wilderness walk, we approach Holy Saturday. That strange in-between time. That time when we have sat at the foot of the cross with Jesus as he gave up his life for us. Sat in the desolation and the darkness. And we're not yet at Easter Day. But actually, as the shafts of light in the wilderness, so there's a glimmer of light in the distance to which we can look. we pause and look towards the light, because we know the light always breaks through. We can look forward with hope, even in this time of dark and isolation, because our God is a God of renewal and hope, a God who walks with us and welcomes us home. It's fascinating, isn't it? Holy Week and Easter, that juxtaposition of darkness and light. And we cannot have one without the other. Jesus asks us to pray for his people. My prayer is that our joy in the light of Easter will be offered up to God, along with the pain of the world in lockdown, so that the two can weave together and in the power of the Spirit be redeemed through the cross into the light of the risen Lord. And as I finally put this together, I received Bishop John's Easter letter, and I'm just going to quote a sentence from that, because that speaks to where we are with darkness and light in the wilderness. He says, I join with you this Easter to walk with the Lord, who made himself vulnerable to come alongside humankind. Easter reconciles the otherwise humanly irreconcilable elements. As the Gospel writers put it, there is joy and fear and belief and doubt in our real life experience and encounter with the risen Christ. May Christ fill you with peace and joy this Easter, despite our fear and even our doubts. And if you can bear with me, I want to finish with a very powerful story written by Trevor Dennis, who was a canon of Chester Cathedral. And it comes from his book, Speaking of God. It's called The Homecoming. From the beginning of time, this had been a desert place. Nothing had ever grown here. Nothing could ever survive here, as far as anyone could imagine. The vast areas of sand and rock surrounding it had once, many centuries before, been covered with forest, or crisscrossed by irrigation channels, had supported thousands of cattle, sheep and goats, and field upon field of grain. But not this place. This was true wilderness, sterile, barren, a cruel, hard place, a place of paralysed chaos where no order seemed able to emerge, a place of no hope. Any track leading towards it veered away or stopped at its edge. Even the insane went no further. Yet once, yet twice, he went there, and not just to its borders, but to the dead heart of it. The first time he slipped in uncertainly, merging in his frailty with the dust and the rock. There was no fuss, no noise, nothing to see, but in that wilderness his mercy, his humility, and his love were put on the rack, tried by all that was merciless and life-defeating. The forces of darkness gathered their strength to twist and stretch, to pull and tear him. They did not prevail. He slipped out again. Without fuss, without noise, without spectacle, and returned to human company, his mercy, humility and love now as strong as steel. Once more he went there, this time not uncertainly. He came as a conqueror, as one who had already won the victory, and the forces of darkness retreated, cowered among the rocks, dared not cross his path. He strode through the dust and across the bare rock, casting no shadow as he went, leaving flowers in his footsteps. Behind him came the creatures of the desert. They arrived in their thousands, running, crawling, sliding in his wake. The insects came too, and the birds. The sky above the place had once been as barren as the ground. But now insects in their millions danced their eternal dance of life in humming, iridescent clouds. The butterflies fluttered about him, enlivening the air with the bright gaiety of their wings. While up there, high up there in the sudden bright blue, the eagles and the kites wove a crown for him with the circling patterns of their great wings. Before this multitude, this noisy celebration, the forces of darkness fled towards a low depression in the dead centre of the place. There he came. As he reached the edge of the hollow, the animals behind him slipped into the shadows of the rocks. The insects ceased their humming and settled on the ground, and the birds hung motionless in the sky. They waited. He did not. He went on without pause, down towards the middle of the depression. There in the centre was a large broken rock, with a strange horn jutting out from its side, tapering to its point some 7 feet from the ground. From that arm of rock hung a rope, and from the rope hung a man. Though a sudden storm howled and shrieked and snatched repeatedly at the body, causing it to swing wildly to and fro, he, the conqueror, marched up to the rock, took the man down, untied the rope from his neck, and laid him on his shoulder. At that moment, the wind died. The animals, the insects, and the flowers invaded the hollow, and the eagles and the kites and falcons flew above it, tumbling and twisting and swooping in their ecstasy. They stayed in that place and made their homes there, the animals and the birds, the insects and the flowers, though he left them, bearing the body of the man on his shoulder. In heaven, their joy knew no bounds. They had waited a long time for this. They had missed him. They needed his company. But now he had come home, riding on the shoulders of the one he had once betrayed. They killed a fatted calf for him, dressed him up like a king, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and wept and cheered as once again the betrayer and the betrayed embraced. So thank you for joining me on this wilderness experience as we give thanks for the joy and the peace and the blessings of Easter. May the blessing of God, from whom we come and to whom we shall return, be upon us as we take each step of this sacred journey. Remain with us this day and every day, until you lead us into your peace, dear God. Amen.